The meeting, and as we're doing that, just waiting for members to sit down.
Ross Tucker's going to join us at the table as well.
Okay, I'll just outline this a slight change of order just to make things run a bit more logically. The next item up is the Kāinga Ora update. Then we'll have item 12, which is the Transport Deliberative Forum, followed by the Auckland's VKT reduction program. It just makes more sense to do it in that order. That's what suits the officers. So having said all that, we'll invite Kāinga Ora representatives. I think we've got Mark Fraser here and Ritashna Maharaj, just to provide an update on Auckland's large-scale project areas, which are part of the brief for this committee and which will be in a number of councillors' wards. And Ross Tucker is here as well, so welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, thanks for having us. So it is, I think, about 6 months since we were here to keep you abreast of what we've been up to. And what I'd like to do today, you've got a pack in front of you which you will have seen. I'd like to just flick through it and talk to a couple of points and make sure that we've got some time for questions. Really, what I'd like to leave you with by the time we're done is that we have a joint program running, and there's quite significant progress in how that works since we saw you last, and there's some big delivery. But also, I'd like to just touch on what's changing in our context, and in fact, was with the Minister of Housing earlier this week, so I'll talk about that. And I also introduce some of the change that we are going to make in our own area to be more efficient in the way that we go about our work. So those are the things that we'll cover off. So I think the most significant thing in terms of this program is that we have a way of working between both Kāinga Ora and the Auckland Council family, all of the asset owners, and in fact including the private sector asset owners, Chorus and Vector, where we are working as one group, one team, on a single program of work. And I think, at the risk of labouring the point, I don't think we could say any of us have really done that before in the way that it is now operating. That was in train where we saw you 6 months ago, but collectively we've made awesome progress in terms of how that's working. And we have a program of work ahead of us, and on this slide you see $2.4 billion of infrastructure. We have a program that is not only the works that Kāinga Ora intends to do or needs to do to make the delivery possible, but the works that the other asset owners planned to do or were planning to do as well. So this idea of dig once becomes a reality because the program is all assets over multiple years, and we're running that as a coordinated team. So that's a really significant achievement, and we're starting to see the benefit of it. Pleasingly, we've also continued to deliver plenty of land and plenty of housing. So with this program, the large-scale projects in Auckland, over about the last 5 years, we've delivered land that will enable over 5,000 homes. That enablement is on the land that we have collectively produced. But interestingly, there's a further at least 2,000 homes that will emerge in the immediate vicinity as other developers and private sector players rebuild and redevelop because of what is now possible. And we've seen it in all of the projects that we're currently operating in. So even though we might be doing a big piece of work, in every instance I can think of blocks of housing that have emerged right next door where one has gone down and 3 or 4 have gone up. So the catalyst impact, if you like, of our work is very real. And I've got some numbers there in terms of the housing deliveries, some pretty good numbers. I will make some comments, I'll save them just a little bit later in terms of current market conditions. But it's a really significant progress in terms of our program. That next slide, we sort of tried to have a think about one of the things that we struggle with in this program is how do you show people, you know, how big is it, and what is it that we've all collectively built. So we've added it up. I'm not going to go through these numbers for you, but they become, you know, fairly large at the risk of sort of understating it. And since we saw you, we've actually finished a couple. So the neighbourhood that is Roskill South, which had Freeland Reserve in the middle, which did a lovely job during the Auckland floods. The neighbourhood that is Owairaka, right on the edge of Mount Albert, and Northcote. The land development works and the infrastructure works for those neighbourhoods are now complete, and the balance of the project activity for those neighbourhoods is the remaining housing to be built. So we've managed to finish all of those really in the last, actually the last 6 months. So pretty significant milestones, 5-year projects, big parcels of work. And then we're off to the next ones. So there's another 8 or so neighbourhoods that are either in construction or about to be. This next slide here talks about our collective next big, I don't know, is it a big move? Certainly large delivery. And that's going to be a resilience intervention in Mangere. So Freeland Reserve, Roskill South, some works that were done in Tamaki, all performed brilliantly in the anniversary floods and have made those communities more resilient. There has been work for a number of years now between us all to design the solution that will enable the same for Mangere. Mangere's tricky, it's pretty flat, used to be a swamp, and it's very close to sea level in places. And we are now at a point with both Healthy Waters, Watercare, AT, that we have the solution that will enable the resilience for the wider Mangere suburb that we all need. And really the balance of this year, the work is the detail of its delivery. This image on this slide shows you a little bit of how it might be pulled off, and that is making more land available, making space for water, appropriately titled. And in this instance, we're able to use the significant land holdings that Kainga Ora has and to take those homes away and make that land available for the flood mitigation. As we slow the water down, we give it somewhere to go. We're also working with parks because there's some reserve areas in this part of the suburb that might also work well if we drop the height of them, as we did in the case of Greenslade Reserve in Northcote. We've got Mana Whenua there with us as part of the team and very much involved in how do we do this. It is at a suburb scale. There's near on 6,000 existing houses that benefit from this work, and it's the next big piece of resilience that we'll be delivering in this program. We did get a lot of publicity back in the anniversary floods on the houses that had been built in Mangere West that were unfortunately flooded, that were new. Contrary to popular belief, the design was the right design. We had things block, and we had an extraordinary amount of water that had let the system down or let us down. But what we do here in this slide here is we deliver something even more significant for the whole suburb. One of the things that we have worked hard on for this program of work is what is a sustainable model for the funding and financing of this works. And how do we do that so that we don't impact on rates and we don't impact on debt. And that was something that this committee agreed when we were here last. And working together, we are able to build a system that makes sure the right users and the right beneficiaries of the works that we deliver are ones that contribute to the cost of that. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it becomes a very important part of the program and a very important benefit of the fact that we are working in the way that we are. And under the current arrangements, we're putting in, well, Auckland Council are committing, as you see in the slide here, 712 million to the LTP, but there are much bigger numbers as we look further out and as we put in place a model that attributes the right cost to the right beneficiaries, also using the inputs of the Housing Acceleration Fund, the HAF, that has come from Crown. Just on our context, the context is changing for all of us, at the risk of stating the obvious. Kāinga Ora in particular enjoys some negative press from time to time, and we have had a review underway with Sir Bill English leading that. That process is complete now, and there's a draft with the Minister. We expect to see a version of that draft Kāinga Ora. There's a cabinet meeting in early May. So the outcomes of that we will see sometime in May, probably leading up to the budget. I don't know the content of it. I can't provide any insight other than the process of doing that with the people leading it has been positive, and the inquiry that we have seen from the reviewers is what is needed in the system that allows us to go better. And the meeting that I attended with both Andrew McKenzie and our chair with Chris Bishop, Minister Chris Bishop, on Tuesday was actually of that vein. What is it that you need, Kāinga Ora? What is it that we do collectively that allows us to produce housing? So I think we're in the right place with this program of work. We have large tracts of land, a joined up program between us all, infrastructure delivery that provides resilience, and ultimately the outcomes of this work that we're doing are housing outcomes. We'll be back in front of the Minister in July, and we're going to do some work on what are the things that we might like to change around the settings or influencing market conditions that allow us to go faster in that ultimate goal. It is a slower market at the moment. We have got land available in these projects that we have builders interested in and have had builders interested in for some time, but we're just struggling, or the industry is struggling to commit. And currently really the sort of the block there becomes finance, so development finance for an environment where interest rates are high, banks are cautious, pre-sales aren't occurring, or certainly occurring very slowly. The moment will pass, but that's where we are right now, and that's some of the work that we'll do, is making sure that we use the scale that we have here to keep the momentum going, even if the industry, or even as the industry slows. And one point that I might just make here, if I could ask, is in the Wellington environment, I don't think it is well understood how well we are working together. Certainly that's a takeaway from me, and any influence or conversations that any of you might have in Wellington to highlight that actually there is something really significant here, and we are in fact working in a different way and very well, I think would be worthwhile. Just a couple of slides to finish. That's all well and good. Big program, work together, do more. We do need to change, however, how it gets done. The industry has, I mean, New Zealand's productivity stats aren't flash, but the construction sector stats at a global level, let alone in New Zealand, are not really very impressive. And we do need to change the cost and the efficiency of the way that we build. Kāinga Ora, particularly on its state housing, but actually also in this land development work I'm talking about, we have done a lot of work and tried just about every version of how do you procure and source the delivery, be it building houses or developing land, that gives the industry the ability to plan for the long term, bring innovation, take penalty out, like long-term contracts, etc. And what we've found is that none of those changes that we've made in terms of the way that we engage with the delivery sector have made meaningful differences that have stuck. Improvements come, but they sort of usually go. Sometimes no improvement comes. So we've been, looking back over the last number of years, really operating within a procurement paradigm. We've only really been looking about how do we buy it? How do we source it? We are shifting to a production paradigm. How does the work get done? Because how we buy it is not having the impact. And the industry, the way it is organised and structured, cannot deliver sustained benefit. So we need to look at how do you actually do the work. So that's the shift and the focus that's occurring in Kāinga Ora. And this next slide just talks very briefly about a couple of things that we've done. I'll just use them by way of example and then talk about how we're going to use it in the land development. So the first one is what's been called the housing delivery system. Some of you might have come across this. It was also called Project Velocity in its early days when it was in a trial. And this was using a manufacturing methodology, if you like, a very task and work focused methodology to take out time and waste in the way that we went about designing a home or series of homes, and then the way that we went about actually building them. The productivity improvements it's delivering are pretty staggering. So Kāinga Ora, when we started, would typically take about 240 days, work days, to produce plans to lodge for consent. By managing the system that focuses on the work and focuses on getting it right and not waiting, we are producing plans for a project, 6 to 12 to 15 houses being a project, in less than 30 days. We're doing that consistently. So we've gone from 240 days to less than 30. We're now applying the same methodology to house construction, physically on site. And where it was taking us 8 to 9 months to build a house, it says in this slide we're doing it in less than 4, but we're actually heading towards quite consistently somewhere between 80 or less. I think the fastest so far is in the 47 days or something, but I don't know, we'll do everyone in 47. But what it means, if we put those two together, is we're able to design a housing project and build it in less than 100 days. And what we're also seeing is that the consenting process that's attached to that during the middle of it is radically different. Because, of course, what we produce and provide to a consenting authority is the perfect set of plans. And we make the job of that consenting authority much, much easier. Consequently, some of them are starting to show up very fast. We're taking the same methodology and approach into Kāinga Ora's asset and maintenance business. We've got 70,000+ houses, many of them aged. We spend nearly $750 million a year on assets and maintenance. It's an extraordinarily large program of work and activity. We are chasing down $265 million per annum saving for Kāinga Ora in that activity by using a methodology that focuses on the work and takes out the waste. So next is land development. So there's about 6 parcels of work in this transformation space that are underway in Kāinga Ora. The 7th is the Urban Development and Delivery team, the team that I'm responsible for. And we're about to kick into the work proper. We're going to use the same types of thinking and methodologies to extract from our design phase, from master planning through to engineering design, through to engineering construction and the production of land. How do we take out the waste, the time? How do we focus on the work? We've spent nearly a year in the analysis of how does the industry work and how do we work. And we're just actually about a week away from setting what is the ambition that in our land development activity we're going to chase down. We think that we can take, if you think about a land development project or a stage of works, we think we can take about 70% of the time out. We think that we can find a 30% cost saving. And if we apply it in the way that we imagine, we're targeting doing half as much work again. So with the same amount of dollars, we can do 50% more. And that goes nicely to the building a system with our partnership that becomes sustainable. Because if we can do the work for the right amount of dollars and do the right amount of work, we have a more sustainable delivery. What's really exciting is that the Auckland Council group and the CCOs are with us in this. And in fact, I've remarked to some people that the leadership and the delivery people in the Auckland Council family are in fact more excited about this work than some of my own team. So the partnership that we have, we're going to use to see how far can we take this. So it's really exciting, and I would like to think that on another one of these occasions in some months ahead, I could come here again and tell you what we're learning and how that's going. But it is certainly our intention to change how we do it. And I was going to leave it there. And
Yeah,
take some
okay,
questions.
thanks, Mark. That's a pretty detailed presentation there for councillors, and I think you've got a couple of questions. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you. And before I pose my question, Mark, I just want to acknowledge Puketapapa local board member who is here, Roseanne Hay. I had the opportunity of sitting in with the Deputy Mayor when the local board made their views on the LTP known to us. And this was really at the forefront of those matters that they put to us. So while you've given us a great presentation today, you would be aware that a lot of the KO-enabled housing in Roskill South, Waikawhai, Wesley, West, in the whole Roskill precinct, there is a lot of excitement about that, and you had the memorandum of understanding on the underground with the former mayor.
Yes.
My difficulty in representing the questions that were posed to Desley and myself relates to, you're talking about detail around delivery. I'm interested in the detail of funding for the delivery, because the Mayor's heard very clearly from central government that they're not going to allow us to rate government properties. We've got to somehow grapple with what we know, the lack of certainty around schools, the lack of certainty about community facilities, the lack of certainty around open space, where you've got these brownfield developments. You know, our policy in terms of open space is probably, it's under review, but it's directed more to greenfield developments. My great worry, and I have seen nothing that gives me confidence on this, is that council's going to start off really well-intentionally with the partnership, but be abandoned when it comes to putting hands in the pocket to actually pay for a lot of the open space that's required. And I know that whether you're talking about Keith Hay Park, you know, these might be local open spaces that Kāinga Ora see, but I know that they're already oversubscribed. They're used regionally. I've got a heap of questions that I would like to be able to pose. So I'm only going to put a couple and then allow others to have a chance, because it isn't probably just Roskill. There will be other areas that are similarly worrying. But we don't have anything in our LTP to be able to fund this stuff. And we want to be able to have the confidence to say to our constituents, as the area doubles in size, it's still going to preserve all of the amenity that you love and enjoy, that people can still thrive in those areas. And right at the moment, other than pretty pictures, I can't give them any certainty on that. And I want to know, will KO front up with the dollars in order to be able to have that open space, to have those schools, and to understand the amenity that is actually required to achieve I think what are the goals that we all have for successful Aucklanders. So I'd really like you to put the money on the table today and tell us how it's going to be funded.
Okay. Why don't I answer what I can of that, but I think we could catch up and I could show you more of the detail. It might help you in the
Well,
conversations
it's not.
you take.
I'm speaking on behalf of those questions that were posed to me from the local board, and I know the local board have been pursuing this for a while to no avail.
Okay. So there's a couple of things in there. We are doing these large redevelopments. What we're finding, and actually all the neighbourhoods that I can think of that we've worked on so far, there's actually quite good open space provision. All of the neighbourhoods we're working on have got large pieces in them already, although sometimes not well set up and well utilised. A really good example of that is the park in Owairaka, which had a back fence and houses turning their back to that park edge. But because of the scale of this project, we're able to take those homes away, put a road frontage, and so make that park more successful and better used. Where it's necessary, and we work with council on this, is during the design phase, if there is more open space required in a neighbourhood, we do deliver that. So again, in both Northcote and the Roskill South precincts, I can think in my mind there specific examples where we have built additional open space, and so there's been housing taken away to make that possible, to make sure the right amount of amenity is there for that community. And then in terms of how it gets paid for, I can't speak to the rating issue on schools. That's not my gig. But in the case of housing, Kāinga Ora does pay rates. And in fact, we are council's largest ratepayer, I believe. And in all of these projects where we're producing housing, the housing that remains in the ownership of Kāinga Ora, we will continue to pay rates on. But also, these projects are densifying. So in every instance, we will leave behind, in total, between us and the market, at least 3, if not 4, in some cases 5 times as many houses as what were there before. So it becomes a challenge for your community because that puts pressure on open space. But if we do that well and provide more where needed, we have a larger rating base to contribute.
So on the general issue of social infrastructure, when will the detail around the schools be made known? And will there be an expectation that schools will be able to, for their sports and recreational facilities, be using council's open space, which we already know is oversubscribed? And I don't want to monopolise this, but I'm also very worried in Wesley. The streets are already very narrow and you can't get 2 cars passing. You're going to have development, which we all support. We want to see densification. But, between 6 and 10 storey apartment blocks, and then people parking on the street, and emergency services, and then private lanes, I feel very uncomfortable, and I'm expressing this on behalf of the local board, that the transport issues have not been, and emergency services have not been sufficiently well considered. So we can't get into all of the detail now, but it's important that we table these and that our community is satisfied that there are answers to these questions.
Well, two things there. Just along the schools front, we work closely with the Ministry of Education in these projects, and so where further investment is needed for an existing or a new school because of the work that we are doing, it's not on us to deliver that, it is on the Ministry of Education. But I would say that actually we have been successful in each instance of that ministry bringing new schooling infrastructure to bear as a consequence of the delivery work we're doing.
So when will you have the answers? You might be a housing agency and the Ministry of Education, but the average member of the public is just wanting to know that that development will have that support. So do you have any timelines for what we can expect from the Ministry of Education on the provision of schooling and space?
No, I don't. I mean, I think that's a question for the Ministry of Education. But what I do know is that if you take Northcote, for example, there is a new primary school that's built in Northcote. In the case of Roscoe South, Freeland Primary School has been upgraded and expanded. And, sorry? Oh, May Road. Thank you. So if there's a school in particular that I can help with, I'm happy to take it up, but I don't know the detail here.
I guess this committee is transport and infrastructure, and what we're talking about is infrastructure which is social and physical infrastructure. And at the moment, we don't have certainty around that. I don't want to pursue it any further, Mr. Chair, but perhaps at some point we could have a workshop and really come to grips with some of the detail that we need.
I think the director has made a note of that. Councillor Simpson, you had some questions?
Yeah, I do. I have three. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And I just want to start on a bit of a positive. Your communication with the Ōrākei local board around the work that you're doing in the suburb of Ōrākei has been really great. So I just want to thank you. They have just for my colleagues' benefit, they have a working group that consists of the Ministry of Education, you, the local board, transport, whole 9 yards. So yep. I think that is a really good model, and I don't know whether that model is being replicated in other places, but I just want to say, to start with, I think that's a really good model, and thank you very much for that work.
Thank you.
Look, I've got three questions, and the first one is with regards to Mangere. In your opening statements, you said that the design of the houses in Mangere was the right one. Look, I'm no engineer, but I went out to Mangere with engineers, and we had a look at some of the flooding of your homes there, and they were leaning like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And the answer that I was told was that the base material just was like polystyrene and basically got absorbed with water and then just caused the house to lean over. Is that something that you're addressing, like changing that material now as a result of the floods from last term?
Yes, is the short answer. So there was a fill material used. I'm not familiar with the name or nature of it on those homes that clearly did not work. The expectation is we'll lift those homes, fix the foundations and put them back. And the material that we're using in those examples has not been widely used, and given that experience won't be used on an ongoing basis.
Right, I just wanted that confirmation, thank you. My second question is around social infrastructure. I'm not going to labour the point that Councillor Fletcher has because I support you, but I suppose if I look at your projected growth, and look, you're doing great for the city, thank you, I just want to put that out there, but if we look at your population growth over the next year, that you're sort of adding 30% to our population growth without anybody else. So it is significant. And I suppose what I'm going to suggest is that when you do come big time into a community, that you actually get joined up with other agencies like the ministry, and like council on community facilities with, community centres. So it might be we have a community centre, but because you're adding so much housing to that community that maybe you can contribute some, we can contribute some, and united we actually have a much better outcome. So, you started your conversation by saying, look, if you could tell central government how well we're working together. I think we are, but I also think that we can do better. And so a little bit of that is to you, Barry, as well, that just to join the dots up, because I suppose my question is, are you willing to do that? And I believe the answer is yes. But that's something I was going to suggest. Look, and my last question is an interesting one. You said in one of your slides that the reduction to landfill was about 83% from your construction. How do you manage that? Sorry, the reduction. Yeah, how do you manage that kind of huge amount of reduction from a construction perspective?
So we're removing a lot of homes to do this work, and where we can, we will reuse those homes. There's quite a number that have been taken off in one piece and are used elsewhere in the country. But those that are demolished, we are deconstructing them, and we've got contracts in place with the demolition contractors we work with to reduce what does end up in landfill, and it's been really successful.
Councillor Dalton?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I just wondered around the infrastructure. Kāinga Ora pay development contributions and they pay rates. And I'm wondering if it's always very difficult to get the development contributions focused in the areas from where they come from, because we all go into one big pot and we have to prove growth, even though we've got growth. And I represent an area that's one of your biggest customers in Manurewa Papakura. I wondered, I don't know, make this awkward for you, but I wondered if you felt that council could perhaps be focusing some of those DCs back into the areas of growth where you are for communities. That would be my experience from what I'm seeing built in my area, which is pretty intensive. That's my first question.
It's not an uncomfortable question, it's a great question. Yes, we do pay DCs, and Ross, who's here with me, and Ratashna, this is actually the work that we're doing. So I talked earlier in my remarks about a sustainable funding model, and part of that is how do we use what we are doing, what council is doing, and what future developers might be doing, and the DCs that they pay in the future to contribute to the work that we're doing in the collective. So if we are successful in that, we have a much more likely to have a sustainable model. Ross, you might like to comment.
There's been a lot of good joined up work here about how do we make the available tools such as development contributions and government funding all work better together. And you saw in the slides there's a lot of additional funding that can be made available, $1.5 billion more than would otherwise be able to be achieved in the LTP by using those kind of tools. And DCs are a big part of that, which is, it's using the DCs are a cost recovery mechanism. It's about fairing it sheerly. Development contributions have some issues and problems. It'll only fund the non-growth bit, so how do you find other funding mechanisms for the bits that are providing existing benefits? How do you deal with the debt issues when there's timing differences? But those are all of the kind of things that we're working through collaboratively and finding innovative solutions to in this example.
And this is excellent. And when I was chairing the local board and we were having quite a lot of housing come in at that particular point in time, to have the mechanism where we could, the local board itself, reprioritise a playground, at the same time as Kāinga Ora is building for very large families or families, and also work with Auckland Transport and with Ministry of Education, and that just all really made sense. So to have this coming as something that is actually officially happening and working is so empowering, particularly for, this is local board space, in a lot of ways, but to be able to see the regional perspective on this is great. I have one last, just a bouquet for you, and it's not from the building side of things, but I chair a charity, and Kāinga Ora put a staff out there every week to be able to talk to tenants that come into our charity who are brokering for a lot of the Kaingoa customers, and to have that partnership, and that's it's what we're talking about here, but have that social partnership as well, has removed incredible barriers for people who just did not know where to go for assistance. So a bouquet to your manager that has enabled that out, and I think they're based in Ormiston, but representing the South and Manurewa Papakura. Thank you.
No, thank you. I'm pleased to hear that it's working. One of the things that Kaingoa has done over the last couple of years is significantly change the way that we resource and support our tenants in our homes. So there is much lower numbers per tenancy manager that makes it possible for us to be closer to and more supportive of our client base and then other agencies out there like your charity. So great to hear it's working.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Dalton. Final question, Councillor Ferry.
Thank you. I guess sort of thinking about how to frame these questions, because some of this comes from my local board experience rather than wearing my ward councillor hat now. So the open space provision issue, which I think is the core of the issue that the local board's been raising and raised when I was on the local board as well. So it's not actually unique to Kaingoa projects at all. There's a similar issue with the former Unitech site, where they are more like greenfields because of their size and scale, but because of our open space provision plan, it's the brownfields calculations that apply, and which are less generous than the greenfield calculations. So, and I understand that this is under review at the moment and coming back to PEP, is that correct? At some point, there's a working group on the open space? Yes, I think Councillor Fletcher's on it. So I think we are likely to potentially see some change in that space, potentially in the next year or two, in terms of council's roles. So how far along is KO with some of the planning and decision making, where if we do decide through that process to increase, say that brownfields over a certain size, the greenfields calculations should apply, or something in between current brownfield and future and greenfield. How, what are the opportunities there for KO to rethink some of those calculations and their plans?
I'm not familiar with that piece of work in the detail, but what I would say is that the way that we go about producing the shape of a development, its future in the brownfields environment, it's an iterative, creative process.
Yeah, that's been my experience on the local board.
That uses everybody. So if there's a change there, and what is the right answer, and it's asked for by this council, then that becomes part of the process of producing that plan.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think the Roskill development, which we're talking a lot about, has numerous neighbourhoods within it. You've mentioned Roskill South, where the civils have just finished recently, and the open space provision there is locked in, right? The civils are finished, the parks have transferred, where there is one new park. There is another park, you mentioned Freeland Reserve, which is now a lot larger, and that's been KO land added. But there are other developments. I live in the Waikofo development. That one is probably also locked in, I think, because Molly Green's going to be the major expanded green space area there. But Wesley West in particular, which is the massive one, where we're potentially looking at multi-storey buildings, that's also the one which only stage 1 and stage 2 are confirmed through central government. So I think that's the one where it would be the most use or most practical to have this in-depth conversation about brownfields versus greenfields percentages. That's also the one where the school stuff is the most critical. Wesley Primary has just had a whole lot of new classrooms built. Wesley Intermediate's scheduled to have a major rebuild. However, the central government changes have now stopped all classroom building, and we don't know what that's going to mean for that local school provision. So I would really welcome if you are able to broker that conversation for us with the Ministry of Education. It's something as a local board really bashed our heads against for a very long time. So is that something you think you can help us with? Is that
Yeah,
Ministry
absolutely.
of Education discussion?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
And we could, there's probably a couple of ways of us doing that. I'd be happy to come back here on another occasion and bring some colleagues who are in Wesley and across that detail. I can talk to some of it.
Yeah.
Or we could take something up outside of here.
Yeah, I think probably outside of here, because this is not necessarily super regional, but it does have regional impact.
Sure.
The other stuff in that space, I mean, I'm aware that the local board, and there's 2 local boards involved with that area, and I'm assuming, you know, you talked about Mangere, so that's another local board area as well. When I was on the local board, we did get about every 6 weeks briefings. Some of that was at a good strategic level. A lot of it was more, okay, this is where we're up to with civils, and these are the timeframes and stuff. Are you aware, are those continue? Is that work continuing? My understanding is that it is, but I just wanted to check out.
It's my understanding.
Okay, and so is that an opportunity for those local board discussions to happen?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
so if it's not, or if we're not making the traction, you know, that community needs with the other partners, particularly the Ministry of Education, then that's the right environment for us to raise it, and we can escalate it further.
Great, I think that you might be worth checking in with the local boards that you're working with.
Yep.
To see how those can be more productive. And similarly, it might be useful to look at some ward briefings. I know I've been offered one recently for Wesley West. I actually went to the open day that they held instead and had a really good conversation with the staff there. We actually covered a whole lot of other sites too. So I guess I would encourage my colleagues when those offers are made to take them up. But yeah, that's another useful mechanism. Are you keen to use that more as well?
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. Thank you, Councillor.
Cool. And then just one more thing, which is, so the area that covers the Roskill development has an integrated area plan. We have an issue with that because it hasn't been fully adopted by council yet, and there are some reasons for that, which trying to pursue. However, that piece of work was specifically done and took like 2 or 3 years, done with mana whenua, done with the community, 2 local boards, in order to get ahead of these kāinga ora massive developments, and also acknowledging there are some big private developments, in particular the Fletcher's development in Three Kings. So is that a tool that you guys are using? Because that's where the conversation happened with the community about, hey, we're going to need some more schools here, this is going to need some more open space. There's an open space network provision plan piece of work that's been done that's fed into that, all of those kinds of things. So is that a document that KO is using and actively engaging with?
And it is, because, I mean, there was a lot of work done,
Yes.
as you know, on producing that across the whole stakeholder set. And I think at the moment what we're seeing, if you're referencing the Ministry of Education example, there's some change or there's some churn or pause occurring in various parts of government, us included, and certainly for the ministry. Does that mean that they're not going to expand schools? I doubt it. Of course they must. But.
Excuse me, that was quite rude. He hadn't finished talking.
You finish your question?
Yeah, yes, we are.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Councillor Williamson?
Yeah, just a quick sort of principal question with regards to the hoary old chestnut of when you're a government and funded by taxpayers' money compared to when you're competing with a private sector person who's got to put their own money. What rules and boundaries and safeguards do you have that when there's some land that's going to be purchased, because I've had it complained to me by developers that kāinga ora just come in and outbid the market, drive the prices up because they've got deep pockets. In fact, they don't have any pockets. They use taxpayers' money. What boundaries and safeguards do you have that you're not disturbing the market price out there by going in and paying the price you pay compared to what the private sector are bidding?
Like any private sector agency, public sector agency, including, I imagine, this council, we have quite clear policy positions on how it is that we engage in market transactions. So if we're going to go and buy property out of the market, the fairly tight limits on what we will pay or what we can pay at market value. I'm quite sure you will have developers that will come to you and say that we have outbid them, and maybe we have, but we are not running a policy of out-competing the market and overpaying by doing it. We can't. We're a public sector agency. We must be competitive and mindful of the taxpayer dollar we use.
So who polices that? If there's a property and the developers say it should be about $1 million for that, KO comes in, we're paying 1.2 for it. And Rand says, that's just ridiculous. They've paid 20% more than it's worth. Who polices the fact that?
But isn't that the market? Isn't that how markets work?
No, but because you're not part of the market, you're using public funds.
No,
So you don't have to worry about where your money comes from.
No, we do have to worry about it. We will not make a purchase or make a development or build houses unless we can produce metrics for that development that are sustainable, just like any other developer would.
So, okay, but I ask the question again, who polices that to make sure you are doing that?
I actually don't know the answer to that,
Okay.
is the honest answer.
Okay,
Maybe he does, yeah.
Okay.
all right, thank you.
A reasonable question, Mark. Maybe we can find out the response to that. And the final question you have today is from Councillor Filipina, who's online.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora koutou, and look, thanks very much for the work, and I know that Margaret has been mentioned, and I know that Angela Pearce from Kainga is in close contact with the local board chair, Tawanu'u Nick Bakulich, so, and have no doubt o tara papatoe. So look, the partai that I have is how often do you reach out to the local boards for briefings, just to advise them what's happening in their local board?
I don't have a good answer for you. I actually don't know. Angela Pearce is an excellent example. I'd imagine that she's having pretty frequent contact with the local board, and I would expect that that's true across the city for our different regional managers. And in the case of the projects that I'm here talking to, we have pretty regular contact with local boards because it becomes as part of that partnership. I can certainly, outside of this session, get you a more definitive answer, but I don't have a number off the top of my head.
No, I don't need the definitive answer because I know the work that your team does with the local board across the region. I do, however, have one request, if that's okay. Can you please get your regional manager, not Angela, but even across the region, to contact me around work that is getting done in the south. Last term, I had meetings with your team around projects that were happening in the Manukau ward. I would love to set that up again because they used to give me information around resource consents, also applications in regards to developments in the south. So that'll be great if that's okay.
No,
Thank
no
you
problem.
so much.
No problem, we'll make that happen.
Hilda.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Filipina, and that's a good suggestion from Councillor Filipina, and no doubt Mark could apply to the other wards.
Yes.
Councillors just the same if that's not already happening. Okay, so I think the item was moved by Councillor Walker,
I'm happy to second it.
seconded by Councillor Fletcher.
May I just request that perhaps Barry Potter can come back to us on those issues around the provision of infrastructure?
Yes, any of these, yep.
Thank you.
And Chair,
Okay.
might I offer to councillors and other staff, if there was, off the back of the conversation we've had today, interest in us arranging time for you to come and see either the project work that I've talked to in the large-scale projects, or perhaps more specifically the comments I was making about the new housing delivery system that we are using. If you were interested in seeing that or knowing more about it, we would be very happy to organise it.
Yep. Thank you for that, Mark. And Barry assures me that he'll coordinate that if there's an interest in that, which I'm pretty sure after today there is. Okay, so thank you for your presentation today and for the councillors' questioning. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, thank you very much. And we'll be in touch, Mark, if there's a follow-up with respect of some of those queries. Thank you. So that brings us on to, and a slight change of order here, onto the Transport Deliberative Forum. And we'll call up Michael Roth, who's leading the team on this. And we're going to receive a bit more information on the outcomes of the deliberative forum that was held last year, and with a view to gaining greater understanding of the community views on the future of our transport system. Welcome, Michael, and I think that's Dr. Anne Bardsley from Auckland University. Welcome.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to be reporting back to this committee the results of our Transport Deliberative Forum. And as you just said, I'm being joined here by Dr. Anne Bardsley, who is the Deputy Director of COI2, University of Auckland Centre for Informed Futures, and she led the project. We'll just go quickly through the presentation. Hopefully you got a chance to view the video that was provided as a summary. Rather than Anne doing a sales pitch for COI2, I'll just quickly mention that we commissioned COI2 to do this because they're an independent academic think tank who deal with complex issues and have done a number of reports on the future of Auckland. And we're also aware that they did a deliberative democracy process with Watercare. So we saw them as the ideal organisation to look at this issue from a transport perspective for us. The actual problem that was put, or the remit, is the question that was put to the forum participants, was what changes can we make to ensure that everyone can get around Auckland efficiently, affordably, safely and sustainably. So it was really about the future of our transport system, addressed as broadly as we could. Just a little bit of context. This started with the Mayor's Letter of Expectation last year, where Auckland Transport was directed to more meaningfully consider public's views on transport projects, and deliberative democracy techniques were specifically raised in that letter. So that's why we were thinking about deliberative democracy and how to get a project up and running. Then NZTA Waka Kotahi came out with the VKT reduction program funding. So we took the opportunity to, VKT being vehicle kilometres travelled reduction, to include this within that process. So this was funded by NZTA Waka Kotahi, and it was delivered with Council and Auckland Transport and by COI2. Just very quick overview from me. So the civic lottery process is a process where many people getting asked to participate, those who express interest, then effectively they get chosen so that they represent the broader public of Auckland. 100 participants were chosen, so it's a mini Auckland in a sense. The process of learning and deliberation involved an online meet and greet. It involved 2 full days in a venue, learning and deliberation, so a lot of time spent with other people, and another online session in between to address questions that were raised. So it's quite a comprehensive process, and the way the forum worked and the outputs we've got is we did a survey with the participants before the process, and we did another survey after the process. So key lessons for us from this was the different answers that people gave pre and post. So with that, I'll pass it on to Anne to continue the detail.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so just a bit of on why we did this. Sorry, am I going that way? Yes. Why this type of approach? And it's basically to answer the public consultation problem that we have. And I think we're all well aware that public opinion is a pretty elusive commodity, and on many issues, the public doesn't really have fully formed and unambiguous views on some issues. They tend to use, we all use information shortcuts when we're making decisions, and the conventional surveys that are put out there to gather public opinion tend to represent the public's surface impressions that are from headlines and sound bites a lot of times, and these top-of-mind opinions can be unstable. Also, the written submission process leaves out a lot of people and doesn't really encourage the kind of public exchange that's necessary in a fully well-functioning democracy. So, as Michael said, we approach this with a deliberative process, deliberation being typically involving what's termed a mini-public, so a representative sample of the community. They're selected randomly after lots of invitations going out, and it's a sortition process using an algorithm that forms a group that looks like the population. And these people are given a chance to learn pretty in-depth about an issue, talk to each other, and interact in a way that often does lead to new understandings and insight. It encourages the participants to learn from each other, to form reasoned opinions, and evaluate trade-offs. So we consider it a more informed public, and because they look like the general public, and in Auckland that's a very diverse public, you can sort of infer that if the public was given these opportunities, these are the answers that they would come to. So just a quick on how we did the recruitment. This is in the report that you would have seen. We did send emails out to more than 26,000 people, and they had to fill out a short demographic survey. We also posted 5,000 letters, which were mostly targeted to areas of low voter turnout. So to pick up people who wouldn't necessarily be on those databases or respond in that way to an email. So we ended up with a group slightly over-selected to get a group of 100 in the room. By the end of it, we didn't have quite 100, but it was a pretty good representation and very obviously the demographic mix of Auckland. And as Michael mentioned, we used a deliberative survey method, which, like a typical survey, we asked a set of questions or statements that we asked them to vote on a Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree on a number of different possible interventions. That first survey just capturing their top-of-mind answers and giving them the survey again after those 2 days of deliberation and learning and the online session. And those were done by the participants anonymously. So that also avoids that social comparison effect that can produce conformity in a room of deliberators. But it does demonstrate that this kind of random sample of the public is able to deliberate on complex issues and come to consider judgments that are often in contrast to their initial opinions. I'm not going to, we'll just take this as read. These were the core of the questions or statements that we asked on the survey. We did cover a lot of other ground in the 2 days of deliberation, but this is also what we asked them about in the end. And what did it tell us? Well, we would say that at the start, even from the top of mind answers, there was initially quite a reasonable support for some but not all of the interventions on this list that could potentially improve our transport system. And after deliberation, support for most of those interventions increased. I'll just point out the first one is actually on building more motorway lanes and lanes on main roads, which was initially a negative answer and became more negative after the survey, after the deliberation. This is just illustrating the shifting opinions that occurred before and after the deliberation. So the things that were the most popular there is around public transport and active modes. There was a big change in opinions around intervention zone pricing and charging, which I'll get into in the next slides. There's also quite a lot of increase in support for development, intensification around transport hubs in the city centre. And we can get back to that if you have any specific questions. But overall, the forum supported, these were the top 5 interventions that came through, not just in the survey, but also in some of the activities that would have been reflected then again in the survey. But they looked at trade-offs on all of these different issues. And the top 5 were to upgrade Auckland's rail network so the trains run faster and more frequently, to make it safer, easier, and more comfortable for everyone to walk around their local area, to provide more bus services so that buses turn up frequently at all times of the day, to provide a safe and connected bike path network across the Auckland region, including removing car spaces where required. And the last one was building more homes closer to the city centre, public transport stations, and main bus routes. And again, like I said, what changed the most, where it was interesting, was around pricing and charging, things that weren't very popular in the first survey, and that slide showed that they were all in the negative. And after the deliberation and the learning and the asking questions of experts, these things all flipped over to a net positive result. They weren't super popular, they weren't among the top 5, but clearly people understood the trade-offs involved, and these things moved into having more support than opposition. And those were charging a fee for on-street car parking, which varies in price depending on where people live and park, charging a fee for driving on all main roads when traffic is heavy, essentially the congestion charge question, charge a fee for driving into the city centre, a city centre cordon, building more homes close to the city centre, public transport stations and bus routes, as I said, that support for that increased a lot, and also for building a bike path network. And we did include the removing car parking as to see if people understood what that meant when they were suggesting whether a bike path network was a good thing to do, and that still was quite positive. So I think you were going to take from there.
So just to summarise the findings, there was consistent support for improvements to public transport, clearly making it more reliable, more efficient and accessible, and expanding the routes and frequency of the offering. There was also strong support for active modes, both walking and bike riding, as Anne just mentioned, and land use planning. So the 2 land use planning questions was more intensification and also about discouraging greenfield development. So those were all well supported. And I thought it worthwhile to specifically draw out the implications for time of use charging because 2 of the questions were around congestion charging. As you see in the first dot point, the initial level of support was -5% for city centre and -15% for main roads. So that means more people opposed it than supported it. But following that whole process, when people got a chance to learn about the issue and deliberate with others and work out what complex trade-offs we face, support for those 2 measures increased a lot, to the extent where city centre had +33% support and main road congestion charges had +26% support. So, as Anne said, not amongst the most highly supported measures, but still substantial positive or majority support. It demonstrates that this is a complex issue where the benefits are not necessarily understood or trusted by the public. They need to go through a process to learn about it. But it did achieve a considerable change in sentiment once they went through that process. And it also makes the point that if we just go out with customer surveys on complex issues like this, then we're going to get quite a different result to what we get when the people are really understanding of the issue. So we have to be very careful with public surveying on this issue because it is vulnerable to stakeholders and media who like to take a conflict position and focus on specific issues. So I believe the deliberative forum showed a good way forward on time of use charging, and we're intending on using these similar techniques to help work out exactly how to design the time of use charging proposal.
Thanks. Just as a follow-up, we did want to broaden this conversation out, so we did an online forum using a platform called Consider It, which did put those same 15 statements as initial proposals to people to vote on in a similar way, but this is quite an interactive platform that lets people add their own pro and con statements, and you can go back to it and change where your votes are. So it approaches that deliberative ideal, but it's not quite there, but we just wanted to see how you could broaden the conversation out. And so this is just a quick comparison of the Consider It forum with the deliberative forum. And you can see, at least on the points that had most change after deliberation, the Consider It forum was closer to the post-deliberation result. It isn't in every case, and there are some differences, and there's subtleties on the way these have to be analyzed next to each other because there's a whole sliding scale. But we feel that on the really hard stuff and the trade-offs, I think that this type of platform can approach a deliberative method and can be broadened to more people. So it's a supplement to those in-person forums that can only involve a limited number. So.
And from council's perspective, opening this to a much broader audience, many more people through this online Consider It platform enabled us to test that the results that came out of the deliberative forum would be roughly similar to what would come out of a broader population group.
I will say that this graph is actually showing a randomized, a randomly selected sample that's representative. So we did a sortition on the bigger group, so it should match the population that was doing the online forum was similar to who were in the room. So, but even the overall group was actually very similar as well. So I just want to conclude that addressing these complex public policy problems does require creating spaces where people can develop a more coherent field of understanding of the issues at hand, and that these types of deliberative processes do provide a view of what an informed public thinks about an issue when they have a chance to consider the scope and complexity of the problem, and they have time to consider evidence, trade-offs, and the perspectives of others. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll open up to questions now. Question first, Angela Dalton.
Thank you, and thanks so much for this. I'm really intrigued about what it's like, or the responses from the participants once they get all of that context. So they're coming in with perhaps a preconceived thought, idea, answer, and then when they're handed all of the information, and there's this realisation, this is actually bigger than what I thought it was. What's their feedback at the end of those 2 days?
It was very positive. I mean, all of these types of processes that we've run, people really appreciate the opportunity to, and they might come for different reasons. And I think on an issue like transport, people had specific things that they really wanted to talk about, and they got a realization of how big the problem was. I think they got a better idea of what AT has to deal with and what council has to deal with. So I think it increases the trust in the institutions as well, but very positive, and we specifically mix people up so that they're not deliberating in groups of like-minded people. We don't know what their thoughts are, but descriptively we mix them up a lot over the course of the time, so they are always interacting with different people, and I think they really appreciate the opportunity to do that, to talk to people that on these issues that they've never been put in that situation before, and it's a very positive experience.
Thank you.
Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a little bit confused just at what we're trying to achieve here. We've had a big discussion about this as a process and almost testing this as a process. But what I kind of understood, if I get it right, is that we had an improvement over the process. But improvement compared to what? Improvement compared to our perspective of the public opinion? Did this, had we measured the public opinion before we went through this process in order to find the amount of change?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Turner. I wouldn't frame it as an improvement. We were looking to see what was the change between a survey that people get without any pre-advice, so you get a top-of-mind result, and them answering a similar question once they'd gone through quite a detailed process of learning, asking questions, looking at it from other people's perspectives. So it wasn't about an improvement, it was about us getting a better understanding of what people really wanted to see once they had very considered opinions, not just top-of-mind responses to a quick survey question.
But surely the outcome, I understood that these processes were a better way at finding informed feedback as to what the public actually want. So what I'm hearing here is that this feedback only marginally changed. So let's take, for instance, speed bumps. I would say to you that everyone talking to me says, stop making speed bumps. You've just told me, if I've heard you correctly, that we've taken a group of people into a room, we have given them a better, more wider understanding of all the implications around speed bumps, but at the finish of that, we still didn't get over 50% supporting speed bumps. Is that what you're saying?
So firstly, I suspect that people who do support speed bumps probably aren't talking to you about it. But more importantly, the change in sentiment was actually quite substantial on the charging issues, which are obviously the most complex trade-offs that people need to deal with. So as we presented, the level of support for city centre congestion charging was -5%. So 5% more disagreed than supported it initially. Afterwards, it was +33%. So 33% more supported it than disagreed. So that's a 38% change. Almost 40% of the room changed their view from negative to positive on that issue. That's a substantial change. And that wasn't the biggest change. The biggest change was on parking charges. So initially, everyone opposes the idea of parking charges, but after they went through the process and realised the implications and trade-offs, their support for parking charges went up a lot. So there were quite substantial changes.
Thank you. Just one last bit so that I kind of understand it, because I'm having trouble. So as a representative of the public, I'm supposed to try to represent everyone's opinion, but I'm supposed to try to mould it around the majority opinion. So, and as a councillor, I'm told, at times we take, when we get submissions which have all come from a template, we say, okay, that's a petition, and we'll count 10,000 or 2,000 as one. And I've challenged that, but them being told, oh, well, it's for you as the councillor to weight what you think that's worth. So here I'm trying to understand the weighting that your process puts on my decision. So when you take that congestion charging, for instance, am I understanding that even after 32% of the people have swung to the positive, we still had more than 50% of the public being on the negative? Is that what you're saying?
No, the overall, actually, the raw percent of people agreeing, which we counted as strong agree, from 7 to 10. So we're removing the middle people, was still 51%. But what the numbers that are presented in those graphs are a net agreement. So they remove the strong negatives from the positive. So it's showing the proportion of people who agree if you counterbalance that by removing the people who very strongly disagree.
Thank you,
I
councillor
don't
Turner.
like removing anybody. Thank you.
We're not removing them, but if we want to count the support in a way that is not ignoring that, because the negatives are lowering the what it looks like the amount of support is. So we are including them.
Councillor Turner, the table in the report shows on question 11, charge a fee for driving into the city centre. The pre-scores were 43 disagree and 38 agree, with 14 neutral. The post scores were 20 disagree, with 53 support and 27 neutral.
Okay, so that's there in black and white for us all to read. Councillor Baker.
Thanks, Chair. So just, I get the fact that we're actually trying to solve a problem where people are actually, our consultation is fraught with problems, and that's a challenge anytime we go out. And so I was just looking at the demographics of the table of the demographics of the panel, I guess, or the deliberative panel, and don't see anywhere about where they come from in Auckland. So 75% of Auckland is rural in terms of landmass, and so to me it looks like it's a really urban focused and doesn't reflect actually a huge chunk of Auckland and the challenges that exist outside of the metropolitan urban limit, as they used to call it. And so how can we guarantee, how can you give us comfort or give me comfort that actually that panel does represent all of Auckland? Because the initial question was all of Auckland and everybody, and so I have a question about freight as well and where that fits in, because again, to me it looks like a very urban thing, and also it deals with stuff outside of the freight in those roads there is no alternative. I think there's a question in there.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We didn't use areas as one of the demographic categories, but we did try to look at, because you put the pool of people, which is close to 1,000 people, into a sortition algorithm. You come up with a group that has filled the buckets that you have put in the demographics, but then we looked for the spread to make sure that we were representing some other areas. I wouldn't say it's statistically representative, but we did have people from rural, and they did raise questions on freight and that they weren't city centre people. So they were in the mix too.
Cool. And just my second question, and it may be a little similar to where Ken was, but it's in regards to, and I read through and it's interesting to me how people change their minds and how they went from this point to that point. And then I looked at the list of people that were presenting to them, and there's one page there in the report that shows the things that they were covering off. And are you confident that what they were actually hearing was a really balanced view in terms of the transport sort of issues that we are facing? Because I look at that list and I go, well, that's sort of skewed one way. And ex-copper, I like to hear all of the sides of the debate, and so it seems to me to be skewed one way, which for me it doesn't surprise me that there was a movement from people at the start going, well, this is our view, because if you spend 2 days and you're getting 2 days worth of people talking to you with a certain bent. So can you convince me, or can you sort of answer that question or query as to how we balanced, or how you balanced those sessions?
Thank you. We canvassed. We developed a list of transport experts on the questions that we were asking. We also took into account the people's questions that they had, and added people into the mix for that. I'm not sure who else are you thinking about? Freight companies. Excuse me?
We did include a stakeholder panel that represented car drivers, bike riders, youth and disabled. So there were some, I wouldn't call them activists, but advocates involved. And the experts that we used were put together by Council, AT, NZTA, and yeah, we tried to find people who would cover all the issues as best we could.
And potentially, if you ask me, you know, some freight operators, so the big vehicles on the same roads, you know, people like taxi drivers and Uber drivers who are out there every day on the road. So the people that use the roads every day, doesn't matter what sort of vehicle and how it's aspirated, they're still using the roads, which are always going to be a case. So I don't know, maybe that sort of stuff, I don't know.
Right, thank you, Councillor Baker. Some reasonable comments and observations there. Member Brown? All
Thank you,
balanced?
Mr. Chair. Reasonable. Do you have a metric on the number of Māori participants that took part in the forum?
They were represented as they are in the Auckland population, at least for the initial 100 that was selected. By the end, I think we were a couple of people short on Maori, but it was close to the demographic spread.
Cool. And I mean, could you provide like a real world example of how these findings from the forum would reduce transport inequities that Māori experience?
Do you have a question there?
It's not. It's an extrapolation, but you know, it's
well,
what
I
we're going
would
to
say
use this for.
that inequalities were definitely part of the conversation, and in some of the exercises were people drawing characters that they had to consider themselves as they were always. There was a comment before about people speaking, representing the majority or representing their group. We never asked them to do that. So we didn't even ask our Maori participants to speak as representing Maori. They were representing themselves and their experiences. So that was all a very important part of the conversation, of having listened to all these different experiences. But also we got them to put themselves in roles of different people in various scenarios and consider what they would do in those cases. So inequalities definitely were a part of it, whether it was specifically about Maori. If that came up in the conversations, it did.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm interested in these multi-dimensional ways to measure and receive public opinion and submissions. So it's good work. Good work.
Thank you, Member Brown. Councillor Darby?
Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Michael. Good to see this work. Good to see that we're developing our methods. Can you tell me, from this learning, I'm sort of talking beyond the report really, what are the takeaways that you've got? Is there anything that you saw here that you think should be improved in the next process that we undertake in deliberative engagement? I noticed, say, the sample started out at 110, 100, I think it was 81 final, and then there were a few key questions where I saw there were 90 responses. So I was sort of thinking, well, is there the demographic mix and getting the read on that? Does that need to be refined more? Does the learning process need to be refined? Are you confident that, say, the questions or that learning process is not led in any way? I'm just inviting you to sort of point out how this process can be built on and improved for us to adopt deliberative participation in a much richer way across council.
Sure. Well, there are ways to do these processes, and like I said, we don't always do a deliberative survey in this way, and it's why we had a larger group than we usually would work with, which is a little easier to ensure that everyone is equally engaged. With a group of close to 100 people, we had table facilitators who, you know, the conversations, we couldn't be over them all the time, but there was very positive responses from the table hosts as well. As far as why sometimes something like a deliberative survey, a deliberative poll is useful is, like I said, it's not, you know, if you have a smaller group in a room and you're there, like with the water care example, they really started to become one learned group, where I don't think in a process that like this one, which was shorter, they got to do that, nor did we necessarily want them to. We weren't trying to build to a consensus. We just wanted to understand what their learning was and what they really thought once they could consider the trade-offs. So their anonymous answers could have been completely against what they were saying at the tables up to that point. We didn't know that. So it depends on the situation and the question, what kind of methodology you'd use. But I think there's always room for improvement. Yeah.
Just internationally, Koitu's been studying this around the world. You're associated with other universities, other institutions that are doing this. And it's been more advanced in other jurisdictions. So what are those other jurisdictions learning about the outcomes? You know, when you get to, I don't know, building whatever it is that was surveyed, what are you learning there? What are you learning from these other jurisdictions that have maybe continued their statutory obligations when it comes to engagement with communities, but then weighted more the deliberative process?
Well, I think Ireland's the best example of that they've been doing citizens' assemblies for quite a while, and they're very well known now there. So the support for them and the people who are outside of those assemblies still understand how the processes work, that it's a group of people like them and that they are learning about it. And so the people who aren't even in the processes are trusting the process. And also they get very high response rates when they put out their invitations for assemblies, because it's such a well-known process that people really want to be involved and have their say in that. So it's, you know, we are at a quite early stage here in New Zealand on people even recognizing what these are and what their utilities is, and that not just the people themselves trust it, but the institutions and the agencies trust the processes, and they're actually kind of also, I would like to say that, I mean, on really complex issues, if you trust these processes and what the people will say after them, for example, like the abortion question in Ireland, that went to a referendum that looked exactly like the results of the Citizens' Assembly. That's taking a really hard question for politicians to deal with and giving it to the public, and in a way that sort of takes some pressure off. This is really, we can trust this is what the people want. So,
Mayor Brown?
Thank you. Kind of my question, isn't this the best advertising for not bothering with any consultation at all? You should just do it, because once you do it, they seem it's okay. That's what happened with dynamic lines at Whangaparoa. People didn't like it, and we did it, now they like it. So same with charging, just do it and they'll like it. I mean, presumably we're elected to do something or other, so wonderful. How can we send this wonderful information to Wellington to say, buzz off, we don't need to consult?
I share your concerns with the value of some of the consumer surveying that gets done, and the real public perception is perhaps a little bit different that gets reported back to AT or to council. And that's why I think this kind of process is very valuable, because we do need to understand what the public want, and this gets us a much better in-depth understanding of what they want, rather than what their immediate top-of-mind response is when we ask them something that might be actually a complex issue that they haven't had much chance to think through.
Okay, finally, Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. That's quite a good segue into my question, which was around looking at this as part of a suite of options. So what's, I guess, the reflections there on how this might fit in with other processes that we have more traditionally used, sort of alongside as opposed to replacing? How do you see that fitting?
We wouldn't say that it replaces. It's an option that on really complex questions can be really useful. the mayor has suggested we shouldn't use any of the others, but that's not what we're saying here. I think there's room to improve other methodologies too, and this isn't the only answer, but it is a very good tool to use when the question's very complex and has a lot of values involved in amongst the technical question.
And we did involve other areas of council who deal with engagement and local boards and so forth. And now that we've got the results, we'll go back to them and work out how this can add value to their existing processes and how they can incorporate it in their work.
One follow-up there is, so I guess one of the things that we sometimes do is we see a good example that's well resourced, and then we try and recreate it with a lot less resources. So is there some danger with a mechanism like this, that if we don't resource it properly, we actually potentially skew things in a way that's unhelpful?
I would say so. I mean, you don't want to launch on these. I mean, it's important to be able to say to the public that you're engaging in these that their involvement is going to be useful and used and listened to. If you don't do that, then you're not going to have public trusting the processes or wanting to be involved. And yes, you can go backwards. So I think it's pretty important that you don't just launch into these very quickly, but do it right, and then it should support doing more of them as opposed to less. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lee, did you want to ask a question or a comment?
Just a question, a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Do we know how much this cost?
Yes.
And?
192,000, I believe. Just under 200,000.
Good God. And are you going to send this report to the Minister of Transport?
Not personally, but I'll put it forward.
I'm sure he'll be interested, especially in the cost of it as well. Thank you.
All right, okay. Okay, move Councillor Walker. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Dalton. There's the recommendations up there. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Okay.
Against.
Thank you. And
Against.
Who's that shouting
Record,
out?
please.
Pardon?
Ken Turner.
Ken Turner. Ken
please.
Turner. Recording his vote against. Thank you, Ken.
Point of clarification, was he recording it against the whole?
Oh, well, he's recorded against, so
Sorry,
he's voting against.
not
it.
just one section of it.
Okay. All right, next item, could we proceed to now, please? Item 10,